Chapter 10, Arca Pharmaceuticals Headquarters, San Francisco. Lee suddenly stood up. "I need to check something," he said, and walked out the door. But not before Flynn saw the sweat beading his forehead. Something was wrong with Lee, seriously wrong. Former General Clancy Flynn had watched him carefully all day. Lee was a slick one, always cool and calm and emotionless. 2 of the secret programs Flynn and his company had financed had earned him a lot of money in return. And the new one was going to be a bombshell. Creating faster, stronger, smarter soldiers was every general's dream. But it was the private sector, and Flynn's company, Orion Security in particular, that was going to make it a reality. They were close. There had been a trial in Africa where Orion had a potentially huge contract to guard a convoy conveying diamonds from a rich mine in the rebel army-infested interior to the coast. At first it had worked like a dream. He and Lee had watched as the team moved with increased precision and speed, like a well-oiled machine. Visibly enhanced, a joy to behold, and then the breakdown where they self-immolated. But those first hours were promising. Lee said he had pinpointed the problem, a question of dosage, and one trial had gone very well and another trial was scheduled for next week. But this new development, if Flynn hadn't seen it with his own eyes, he would never have believed it. The potential. There was no limit to what he could earn with enhanced soldiers with powers like those. Lee was onto something that would change the world if it didn't kill him first. If Flynn didn't know better, he'd say Lee was drunk. But Lee didn't drink. He was a teetotaler, something Flynn couldn't understand. The world was full of pleasures Lee seemed immune to. He was a driven, dedicated man, and he was falling apart. The signs were clear. Lee had spent the entire time drumming his fingers restlessly on the desktop and jiggling his foot. He'd swallowed often and adjusted his shirt collar as if it were too tight, though actually it was loose. Lee had lost at least 10 pounds since the last time Flynn had seen him. But more than anything else, there had been a barely contained excitement about the man, which was totally unlike him. Flynn had known Lee for a long time. He'd commissioned research from Lee's company back when he'd still been in the military. He believed in Lee so much he dipped into his own company's pockets to keep this line of research going when he retired. It had been banned by the government, but what the government didn't know wouldn't hurt it. Quote-unquote human experimentation was a big no-no in government labs, but that was bullshit in Flynn's opinion. Portable weaponry had gotten about as lethal as it was ever going to get, and there were limits to the use of the big bombs. The last frontier was human enhancement, which was going to make all the difference in the coming resource wars. Lee had always been cool and rational, the ultimate scientist, though Flynn had always suspected Lee had another agenda. Not money, which puzzled him, because money was the best motivator there was. Lee liked money well enough, but mainly he saw it as a tool to help him continue his research. He himself lived simply, so money wasn't it. Whatever it was, as long as it didn't impede the ultimate goal, Flynn didn't give a shit. But now whatever it was that was driving Lee was messing with him, with the men Flynn had just given $15 million to. If what Lee was working on panned out, the history of soldiering would be changed forever, and Flynn would almost overnight become one of the richest men in the world. If it didn't pan out because Lee went off the reservation, then Flynn was out a shitload of money, and the promises he was making to potential clients would turn out to be so much hot air. And a couple of those clients were not men you could lie to and walk away from alive. Whatever happened, he needed to stick around for a few more days to make sure Lee wasn't going to make $15 million go up in smoke. He tapped his ear. He needed to check in with headquarters. Yes, sir. Oh, yeah, Melissa, his new secretary. Efficient and pretty and eminently bangable. She could roll out of bed after 2 hours of fucking him and coolly plan his next day's schedule while he was still gasping on the bed. Yeah, Melissa, I know I said I was coming back today, but I need to stay. Block out the next 2 days and cancel my flight back to Virginia. Tell the pilot he can stay at the Marriott until I need him. A pause and then Melissa's throaty voice. Done. I'll let you know when I'm arriving. And Melissa? She recognized that tone and her voice dropped even lower. Yes, sir. Don't be wearing panties when I arrive. Flynn disconnected with her throaty chuckle ringing in his ears. Mount Blue. Elle found herself in a warm embrace, short but heartfelt. The woman embracing her was slender, so the slight protuberance of her belly could be easily felt. She was pregnant, and there was no doubt whatsoever who the father was. He stood right behind the woman with a hand on her shoulder. They made a strange couple, Beauty and the Beast. The woman was very pretty, with shoulder-length dark hair and gray-blue eyes, and the husband was huge and ugly and frightening. Those were the only words that really fit. He was the tallest man in the room, though both Nick and John were tall men, and would be in just about any room. His face was hard, with a nose that had been broken several times, but looked like a knife scar on one side and a burn scar that had melted the skin on the other. His eyes were cold and hard. This was a guy you wanted to avoid if you knew what was good for you. That didn't stop the woman from gently stroking the huge hand on her shoulder and giving him a quick, loving glance over her shoulder. He smiled down at her, and the entire arrangement of his facial features changed. He didn't turn warm and cuddly, but there was no doubt what he felt for the woman. Elle herself would have been more frightened to be in the same room as the guy, but love was love. What could she say? She'd been in love forever with a man who'd abandoned her twice, so she was no one to judge. This woman knew her, which was eerie, bordering on creepy. How do you know my name? Elle asked as the woman took her hand. Chicago, May 2022, the annual meeting of the American Neuroscience Academy, Room B. Your paper on immune markers in trance states blew us all away. The woman shook her hand gently, then let it go. While Elle's hand had been in hers, there had been a weird flash of warmth, something gently blooming, then fading. It might have been coincidence, but she felt a little stronger too. Chicago, May 2022. You were there? I was, the woman smiled softly. Though I read the entire paper later because I had to leave halfway through and go to room C to deliver my own paper on the role of Cure 4.1 in oligodendrocyte myelin formation. Elle gasped. Dr. Young! Dr. Catherine Young! This time Elle was the one to grab a hand. She pumped it up and down. How amazing to find her here. Catherine Young was a legend who was doing cutting-edge research into dementia. Unlocked dementia, and you unlocked a number of secrets of the brain. What a privilege! I've followed your work these past years with a great deal of interest, particularly your work on the gamma secretase activating protein in translating ribosome affinity purification. I know you're applying it to a study of dementia, but really, it could be extrapolated to association cortices in the parahippocampal gyrus. Dr. Young leaned forward. Oh, I know. I was studying the dementing process, but your findings are important in gaining a clearer understanding of immunoreactivity. When we used immunofluorescence assays, did you use the Coons and Kaplan technique? We did. It's old, but it is reliable and stable. I know some are using the new Hunter and Florheim technique, but... Whoa! A deep voice interrupted. Elle turned her head to see Nick with his big hands up in a timeout gesture. Some pity for the non-geeks here, and especially pity for two certain non-geeks who are starving because they just saved a certain geek's ass. Elle felt anger shoot through her whole system. That would be me, I suppose. Nick nodded. That would definitely be you, Dr. Connolly. No wonder I couldn't find you. You'd changed your name. His jaw muscles visibly moved. I imagine that there's a Mr. Connolly somewhere, or, knowing you, another Dr. Connolly. Elle's own jaw tightened. Nick sounded angry, as if she'd done something without asking permission. How dare he? She narrowed her eyes. No, mister, no doctor. Connolly was my mother's name. I took it after. What? Nick's eyes widened and he got in her face, jaws working. She could actually hear his teeth grinding. You changed your name? You fucking changed your fucking name? Do you have any idea how fucking hard Nick. Dr. Young's husband landed a very heavy hand on Nick's shoulder and dug his fingers in. Nick's face showed nothing, but those hands looked extremely strong. It was entirely possible that he was doing some damage to Nick's shoulder. The man shook his head. We don't talk to women like that in Haven, Nick. We don't talk to anyone like that. You should be ashamed of yourself. Nick shrugged his shoulder and the man lifted his hand. Nick was glaring at her and she glared right back. Of all things, she hadn't expected this. He was mad at her. The nerve. Anger, red hot and painful, boiled in her chest. Elle turned to the other woman in the room. Dr. Kathy Young could be trusted to be rational. Dr. Young, please tell Nick. Dr. Young lifted her hand. Please, Dr. Connolly, call me Catherine. 1 big breath. 2. Manners, she told herself. And you must call me Elle, of course. Catherine nodded and smiled. They could have been in a drawing room over tea instead of some hidden location with 3 frightening men and 1 world-class scientist. Well, Elle, we should make some other introductions. You've met John. John gave an ironic smile and a 2-fingered salute off his forehead. Ma'am. Elle inclined her head. We've met. As a matter of fact, he rescued me. He rescued you? Nick said heatedly. He didn't do anything but fly the hello. So how the hell does he come off as the big rescuer? I'm the one who... And this is my husband, Mac. Catherine's voice was soft, but she managed to run right over Nick's rant. Man. Mac had the deepest voice she'd ever heard. It was a rumble she felt in her diaphragm rather than heard. He reached over, engulfed her hand in his, squeezed gently for a second, then let her hand go, which was nice because he could have crushed it easily, and Elle needed that hand. Catherine hadn't mentioned last names at all. Interesting. Well, if she couldn't know names, could she get some info on other things? Nice to meet you all. So, where am I? She asked. Silence, utter silence. That was interesting, too. I'm sure Nick will bring you up to speed eventually, Elle. Catherine smiled at her. But in the meantime, you must be exhausted and you must be hungry. So before we show you to your room... My room, Nick interrupted angrily. My room. She's staying with me in my room. Another moment of perfect silence. Elle, Catherine asked softly, are you okay with that? She had no idea what to say. None. All of a sudden, she was aware of her immense exhaustion, like a living thing weighing down on her. The huge boulder that weakened her knees and seemed to dim the lights in the room. This was Nick, the man she'd loved almost her whole life. And this was Nick, who'd abandoned her the day after she buried her father. This was also Nick, who by some crazy tangled reasoning in his mind had decided he was angry at her. That was enough to make up her mind. No, she said decisively. Could I have a separate room? How she was going to deal with Nick from here on in was something she was going to have to face in the future. But right now she was at the end of her physical and mental resources. Having a fight with Nick was utterly beyond her. Nick's eyes bugged. What? His deep voice rose an octave. What? What the fuck? Of course, Nick, stop that right now. Catherine Young seemed to be about half the weight of Nick, and she had a soft voice, but that voice stopped him dead in his tracks. His mouth closed with a snap, lips pressed together as if he had to work to not talk. But his eyes were still wide and a little wild. He huffed out a big breath like a bull. He wasn't liking this, not one bit. Good. Well, first things first, I'm not letting you go to your room before getting a bite to eat. Catherine gently steered her toward a cart, pulled a chair from a desk, and sat her down. Mac pulled something down from the wall, detached it, pushed a button, and it magically unfolded into a table that connected to some hidden seam in the service cart with a distinct click. It was a cue for everyone to grab a chair and place it around the table. Guests first, Mac said in his deep bass, which was kind but also served to remind everyone that she was the outsider here. Mac and Catherine started lifting covers off the serving plates, and the room filled with a scent of delicious food. Nick sat his chair right next to hers, so closely his shoulder brushed hers as he piled food on a plate and set it in front of her. "Eat," he commanded. Everyone was looking at her expectantly, as if they'd never seen a person eat before. Elle waited a second, fork poised above her plate, watching her. Nick nudged her plate closer. "Eat," he repeated. She ate. All it took was a bite or two for her eyes to open wide with astonishment. As a scientific experiment, she took a bite from everything on her plate and confirmed her first hypothesis. "This is the best food I've ever eaten," she blurted. They'd been watching to see her reaction to the food. Catherine sat back and looked at her husband and John with a smile. Both men nodded. Nick didn't meet their eyes because his were fixed on her in an unblinking stare. Everyone but Nick was transferring food to their plates. Nick's plate remained empty as he continued watching her. It didn't intimidate her, though. She'd suffered worse things than having someone watch her eat. Not to mention the fact that eating this amazing food was no hardship. Huge ricotta raviolis with the wild mushroom and cream sauce. The most succulent tagliata in the history of the world, dusted with arugula and Parmesan flakes. The lightest possible fried artichoke slices. Sautéed escarole with plump raisins. Brussels salad with hot bacon. Steamed broccoli with garlic and a balsamic vinegar reduction. A freshly baked ciabatta to soak everything up. Simple affair done absolutely perfectly. Nobody talked. Nobody should. The food was a religious experience and required proper worship. Elle had eaten a couple of times at Chez Panisse before Alice Waters retired, and this food was arguably better. There was tiramisu, what looked like the platonic ideal of tiramisu, frothy and creamy and chocolatey, in a big glass bowl in the corner, just for encouragement. When she was stuffed, Elle sat back. Is this a secret 5-star restaurant, the kind that never advertises, and you have to be a foodie and pass a test to find? Though, this was a slanted glance at John. Hooding clients is taking it a bit far. Good old Stella. John had eaten with unswerving fervor and wasn't finished. He heaped a third helping of everything onto his plate. I love her experiments, but when she does the basics, man, no one does it better. Stella? The Stella person was obviously the chef. John grinned. Yeah, you wouldn't believe who the cook is. She's John. Mac's deep voice was like a whiplash. John's blonde eyebrows shot up. We might want to discuss this and other things tomorrow. Catherine placed a hand on her husband's huge one, and she gave Elle a smile. There was another painful silence. Secrets. Deep secrets that weren't going to be shared with her. Okay. Nick had spooned some of the tiramisu onto a dessert plate and put it in front of her. Eat. Elle set her teeth. Is that all you can say? Eat. Oh, no. Nick gave a smile that showed his own teeth, but wasn't friendly. I've got a lot of other things to say, but not right now. Later, when we're alone. Curse her fair skin. Heat rose from her chest, and she knew she was turning pink, because it was very clear what he meant. And curse her obsession, because instead of making her angry that he was assuming she'd just sweep aside 10 years of abandonment to go to bed with him, her body reacted to his words and to the images his words conjured up with enthusiasm, completely out of her control. Right now, with Nick so close, his shoulder rubbing hers like body heat, his body heat like a force field around him, his fierce eyes locked on hers, her body remembered what it had been like to make love to him. She'd spent the entire night with him in a state of arousal, just like now. A flush of heat prickled through her body as if she'd suddenly stepped out into the blazing sun. Her breath grew shallow, her breasts felt heavy, swollen. Her sex wept with pleasure. Incredibly, it suddenly felt as if Nick's penis were in her, and her sex clenched around it, stomach and groin muscles pulling hard. Her heart was knocking against her ribs so hard she was sure someone could hear it. Certainly Nick could, or he could hear something because his gaze narrowed and tightened, his nostrils flared, and 2 white lines of stress appeared around his mouth. His eyes were focused on her face, then abruptly dropped to her chest. It would be pointless to cover her breasts with her arms. He'd seen her hard nipples. Oh God, this was so humiliating. It was like being stripped bare of all defenses, rendered down to bedrock, open and vulnerable when she'd worked so very hard all these years to make herself strong and protected. All it took was Nick's presence, and she morphed back to that helpless, grieving girl who'd been full of hopes and dreams for one night. What a triumph it must be for Nick, that he could disappear for 10 years and she'd still be so lovesick. His mere physical presence turned her on more than any number of quarters ever could. Nick didn't look triumphant and cocky, though. He looked stressed, almost in pain. God damn it, he said suddenly, grabbing her hand and standing up. He walked fast to the door, pulling her stumbling behind him. Elle looked back and saw Catherine half rise and her husband reach out to her and shake his head. She sat back down, looking troubled, and then the door opened and Nick pulled her into the corridor as the door slid closed behind them. Elle stopped, frozen. Ow. The first thing to strike her was the smell of a vast garden of lush vegetation, sweet and fresh. The corridor was curved, one of many circling a huge central space filled with plants. Trees, bushes, flowering plants, leaves thick and glossy, thriving. The space was amazing, huge, like a city square, rising up to a ceiling, or a roof, a transparent roof studded with bright lights against the black night sky. Down on the ground level, someone walking on a path looked up and waved at Nick, who paid no attention to anything but getting them to the elevator at the end of the corridor. She stumbled again, but instead of stopping, Nick put his arm around her waist and speeded up. Elle didn't know where they were going, but wherever it was, they were going there fast. Nick barely made it to the quarters red, and Bridget had just vacated because they had a brand new baby, the first Haven citizen. He felt like any minute now something would explode. His head, his skin, his cock, something. Just itching to go up in flames. Something inside him that couldn't be contained and was ready to blow. He had to draw in a deep breath to be able to function even on the most basic level. He tapped on the wall beside the door and a keyboard lit up. He turned to Elle and tried to keep the rasp of strong emotions, anger and relief and, well, horniness, from his voice. For the moment, this is where you'll stay if you don't want to stay with me. He ignored the huge pump of his heart that those words and the very idea created in him. That Elle, finally with him again, wouldn't want to stay with him. Be with him. He punched in a 4-digit code. I'm putting in a temporary code. 1993, your birth year. You can change it later if you want. He looked at her, the implication a dark cloud between them. She might change it and not give him the new code. The door was open and he held his hand out. She ignored it. She crossed the threshold and he marched in right behind her. That lovely face turned indignant. I don't know if I made myself clear, Nick, but I do not want to sleep with you. As soon as the door slid shut, he backed Elle up until her back hit the door with a thud, then moved in close. He was behaving like a real dick, but he couldn't help himself. No way he could have stayed in the war room eating and talking with Elle right beside him even 1 second more. Right now she was here with him, so close he could touch her if he dared. Nick slammed his hands on the door right beside her head. She was caged in by him, though he wasn't touching her anywhere. If she really wanted to get away from him, he'd let her. It would kill him, but he could do it. He hoped. He wasn't touching her anywhere, but it was as if his skin had developed some other sense or was able to reach out to her. He dipped his head, his nose shifting her hair away from her ear. You don't have to sleep with me, but damned if I'm going to leave you alone in here. You were comatose when I found you. You've been through hell. If you need something in the night, you don't know how this place works. You won't know how to call for help, and I just stay awake worrying about you. So if you don't want me to touch you, I won't. But I'll be goddamned if I leave you alone here. He pulled away and looked down at her. Jesus, why did she have to be so fucking beautiful? She was even more beautiful than the last time he saw her. Over the top gorgeous, super smart, a doctor no less. Someone Catherine admired, and Catherine was one of the smartest people Nick knew. Nick had thought of Elle almost every day since Lawrence. He'd memorized her. The last image of her sleeping in bed was one he'd carried inside him for 10 years. The super soft, pale blonde hair like a cloud around her head. The light blue eyes that looked like shards of summer sky. The high cheekbones, the shape of her head, that narrow torso. The puff of pale hair between those long, slender legs. Every inch of her was in his head. But there was a new Elle now, all grown up. And if anything, she was even more perfect than the young girl. He eagerly drank in all the new details of this new Elle, because though she was never leaving his sight again, if he could help it, life had this funny way of whacking you in the head. He would have sworn he would live the rest of his life in ghost stops. When his past had been wiped out and he'd taken the oath with Lucius Ward and Mac McEnroe as his commanding officers, he knew this was to be his life forevermore. And then Ghost Stops died, its forces scattered, accused of treason. What he thought would be an undying commitment proved to be short-lived. So, yeah, you never knew. So he drank in every detail of Elle, because life being what it was, she could disappear on him in a heartbeat. Her skin was still ivory perfection. The few lines around her eyes did nothing to detract from her beauty. She'd filled out so she no longer had that lost waif look. She looked strong and capable and held herself with authority. God, he loved that. He was just barely keeping himself from touching her. He had to keep his hips pulled back because his dick was pressing against his pants. It wanted to be inside her. Smart dick. He could barely remember his last hard-on. Some waitress down in Bakersville. She'd been nice enough, lonely like him. The signs had been unmistakable. Nick had become the world's greatest expert on lonely and could sniff lonely people out in a crowd. They had gone to a nearby motel, and she'd been older and more used up than he thought, and his cock had gone a little limp. She noticed, had smiled sadly, and started buttoning her blouse back up. Nick had willed his cock back up and forced himself to give her an extra good time, and afterward, when she'd left at dawn, he'd stared at the ceiling until the sun rose over the windowsill, thinking of absolutely nothing at all. That had been 6 months ago, and he hadn't had wood since. Hadn't seen a woman who even vaguely interested him, and hadn't jerked off. Right now, it felt like his cock would never go down, ever again. He bent again, his lips almost but not quite touching that long, pale, slender neck. So like it or not, Elle, I'm staying here. I'll sleep on the couch. I'll sleep on the fucking floor. I don't care. But you're not leaving my sight. Elle gave a long exhale. You bastard. Elle's voice was the barest whisper. Yeah, no argument there. There wasn't. He was literally a bastard. He doubted his mother even knew who his father was. Apparently there'd been plenty of candidates, but over and above that, in Ghost Stops you lied and cheated if that's what it took to get the job done. He'd been undercover and lied about himself so much it was hard to remember what was the truth. He and his teammates fought for survival, not for goodness. There had been very little of that in his life. The judge and Elle herself had been the only good people he'd ever met. So yeah, he was a bastard. He turned his head so his ear was close to her mouth. So in a second, I'm going to step back, though it'll cost me, and let you settle in. But I'm not going anywhere, and you better get used to that, because from here on in, I'm sticking to your pretty tail. Her skin flushed. He could almost feel the heat. She pulled in a deep breath and gave him a hard shove. If he didn't want to move, no shove of Elle's could ever make him move, not even an inch. But he stepped back. "You bastard!" Her pale blue eyes shot fire. "You son of a bitch! You leave me twice without a word, and now I'm supposed to let you just stick close to me until the next time you leave?" Nick fisted his hands in her soft pale hair, pulled her head back a little, and kissed her. Finally. It was what he'd been craving since she'd woken up in the hover car. Not before. Before, he'd been too wild with terror to think of kissing her. In fact, if he'd thought of it, and if he believed in God, he'd have taken a vow of chastity in exchange for a living, breathing Elle. He'd have given anything up, promised anything on earth to find her alive. Kissing her had taken a back seat to that. But he hadn't promised anything to anyone. He'd found her, saved her, won her, fair and square. Her mouth still tasted wonderful, fresh, clean, enticing. She was holding herself back, her mouth cooperating, but the rest of her stiff and unyielding. She stiffened and shoved him again, sliding away from the wall. He was angry, frustrated, still humming with adrenaline. He wanted to hold her, protect her, fuck her. But even through the huge waves of emotion roiling through him, emotions he hadn't the foggiest idea how to handle, a small part of him, the non-dickhead part of him, rejoiced. This was the real Elle now. She'd somehow regained her footing. He'd found her nearly dead. She'd been hooded, taken to an unknown location, met people she'd never seen before, and who held power over her. She'd been beaten down just a little. But this Elle, she didn't do beaten down. She stood absolutely straight, high color riding her high cheekbones, light blue eyes narrowed, so that only a pale blue gleam showed. Her face, her entire body stiff with dignity and resistance. This was the woman she'd become, strong and in control. He stepped back, hands up, because she looked like she was about to attack him. Nick wasn't afraid of anyone on earth in hand-to-hand combat, except Elle, because to save his life, he couldn't lift a hand against her. If she were armed and shot him, he'd be unable to resist. He was really lucky she wasn't violent by nature. "I didn't leave without a word," he said softly. Her face sharpened. "What? What's that supposed to mean?" "I left you a note. I suspect you didn't see it." Her nostrils flared. "Stop jerking me around, Nick. Damn you." "I said I was coming back, and I did. I came back. I thought we would be gone for a day or two, but it turned out we were gone for 3 months, but I left you a note." "Yeah," she sneered. His jaws clenched hard. "Yes, I did. And you know what?" He tapped her on the chest with a finger. "I risked everything to leave you that note. It was a court-martial offense. Only married operators can tell wives that they are going on an op, and you weren't my wife. If my commanding officer found out I had left a note to someone who wasn't a relative, I would have been fucked. So leaving you that note was a big fucking deal." She punched him. It didn't hurt, but did take him completely by surprise. "I didn't find any note." "No, it fell to the floor because you threw back the covers when you woke up." Her eyes opened wide. "How the hell would you know that?" "Because I came back for you. You're not listening, Elle. I left the note on my pillow, but when I came back it was on the floor. You didn't see it. You didn't see it, and you didn't trust me to come back, and you left. And I've spent the past 10 years worried sick about you." And she changed her fucking name. He was still mad about that. "Oh no, Nick Ross." Elle moved away from him. "Oh no, you don't," he thought. "You don't get to hold back." His hand on her cheek brought her face back to him. "Look at me, honey. I'm not lying. I'll never lie to you. I got a text from my superior officer that night. We were going on a secret mission. And though the U.S. military has divorced me and would probably kill me on sight, I still can't tell you where we went or what we did. But I was under direct orders to leave immediately and not tell anyone where I was going, or even that I was going on an op. I thought it would only be for a few days, but we ended up staying 3 months. Elle brought her hands up. They were shaking. "Don't," she whispered. "I can't deal with this now." The flush of anger had gone from her cheeks, leaving her icy pale. He didn't ever want to see that color on her face again, and here he was the one who caused it. Shame made him step back. Okay, you don't have to face anything right now except shower and bed. I want to sleep alone, Nick. You will. I'll bunk on the couch. Alone. Not going to happen. Sorry. I'm not going to leave you alone. I won't touch you unless you want me to, but I'm not leaving. Their eyes met and held. She was strong-willed, but so was he. She made a sound in her throat and looked away. Damn straight. She wasn't going to win this one. Nick pointed. The bathroom's through there. You'll find everything you need. You'll find clean teas in the dresser drawer. They'll do for a nightgown until we can get you some clothes. Now I'm going to lie down because I don't know about you, but I saved someone's life tonight, and I'm goddamn tired. He could hear her teeth grinding. No matter. He went to the closet, pulled out a blanket, placed his boots next to the couch, lay down and pulled the blanket over him, and closing his eyes, turned over. He didn't watch, but his hearing was just fine. He heard her take a shower, pad across to the bed, and slip under the covers. The bed was comfortable, he knew that. It was the same make as his own, and it was great. She didn't resist more than a few minutes. He heard her breathing slow down and almost felt her tumble into a deep sleep. He waited half an hour, then threw the covers off and padded barefoot to the bed. He dimmed the lights to the faintest of glows, just enough so if she woke, she wouldn't be in complete darkness. There was no question of sleep. He felt like he'd never sleep again. Every hormone in his body that governs sleep, hope, happiness, and sex was pinging around his system, and he had nowhere to go with it. He hooked a chair with his foot and sat down by her bedside, because the only thing that could calm him was looking at her. Elle. After 10 years, 15 if you counted from the day the judge kicked him out, she was here with him. He'd lost hope. He'd resigned himself to that aching emptiness he sometimes let himself feel, knowing it would be forever. To his dying day, he'd be alone in the most elemental sense of the word. The closest he had to a place in the world was here, Haven. He respected Mac and John. He liked Catherine and the misfits making up Haven. That was going to be the extent of his relations till the end of time. Everyone at arm's length, no one close. And now, Elle. She was pissed at him. That was cool. Didn't make any difference to him because he had her again. That particular warmth that only she could give, it was back again. She'd slipped through his fingers once, but she wasn't slipping twice. He sat next to her, watching her pale profile, watching the covers rise and fall, knowing he was going to be next to her for the rest of their lives, and felt something he hadn't felt in a long, long time. In 15 years, actually. Happiness. Her eyes fluttered once, twice, opened. If he hadn't been staring at her face, he'd have missed it, but he hadn't been able to look away from her all the while she slept. Outside on Mount Blue, dawn had come and gone, and it was late morning. If he hadn't wanted to guard her sleep, he'd have tapped a button and turned the walls into giant monitors and watched the dawn with her. It would happen. Elle frowned, light blue eyes flickering from him to the room like bolts of lightning in the dim light. Nick tapped and the ambient light came up slowly so she could see more than the dim shadows of the furniture. She hadn't had the strength to notice much last night, but now he watched her take in her surroundings. The room was nice. Everything in Haven was nice. They had super talented people who designed the spaces, and he and John were master thieves. They had stolen furniture from the finest designers. The room was spacious, beautifully appointed, a delight for the senses. Elle's gaze rested thoughtfully on everything in the room, taking in the luxurious feel of it. Finally, her light blue gaze rested on him. "You," she said. Nick couldn't figure out the tone of her voice. One thing for sure, though, it wasn't enthusiasm he was hearing. He leaned forward in his chair. placing a hand on the mattress. Me. There was maybe half a foot between them, but it felt like oceans, like whole valleys and planets were between them. Nick couldn't stand it for 1 second longer. Talking things over would come later. The words would only confirm what already was. She was his. He was hers. He leaned forward and touched his mouth to hers. He could taste the surprise. Now he wanted to taste the heat. He'd been a good boy. He'd waited. He'd fed her, let her sleep. But the control was fraying because just watching her sleep, he wanted her like his next breath. He leaned against her fully, bringing her arms up and around his neck. She resisted, but he kissed her harder and felt the exact, precise moment when her resistance broke. She tightened her arms around his neck, nearly choking him, and lifted herself up into him so her breasts rubbed against him. Oh, yeah. He ate at her mouth, pressed against her harder, and felt his mind blur. There was no strategy now in his movements, no feeling his way forward. His body took over completely. He hadn't been celibate these past 10 years, but it felt like him. He panted as he pulled her t-shirt up and off, then unzipped himself. He slid under the covers and shifted her leg with his hand, remembering clearly how soft she felt, and his rock-hard cock found its unerring way inside her. He pushed hard, mind blasted by all that softness and heat, and he stopped. Oh God, he wheezed. There was barely enough oxygen to breathe, not much making it to his head, but what he was feeling was unmistakable. Buried deeply inside her, Nick lifted his head and looked down. So beautiful, like an otherworldly creature, an eye magnet for men, and yet... He moved his hips forward as if testing her. No one else has been here. Nick stared into Elle's pale blue eyes as he said this, and her eyes flared. No one ever has been here but me. Her mouth opened and closed. There was no way for her to lie because her face, her eyes, her whole body was open to him. It was too much. His hips started hammering against her, lifting her with each stroke, and he could feel her emotions pounding inside her, finding release in the sex. It was fast and hard and intense and couldn't last, and it didn't. One last stroke that drove her almost to the headboard, and he started coming like a train, moving hard inside her all the while, coming in hot pulses that felt like his spinal cord had liquidated and found its way to his dick. And at that very last minute, when he was crushing her against the mattress, head down on her shoulder, sweat coating his body, he felt it, that sweet little cunt, clenching around him in white-hot pulses, milking him. Oh, God, yes. At the end, they lay there, plastered together, Nick still panting. Elle punched him in the shoulder and burst into tears. Shh, shh. Nick kissed her neck, that soft spot behind her ear. Her mouth, briefly, because she punched even harder when he kissed her lips. No, honey, no. He settled more deeply against her. He'd lost part of his erection. The days in which he could come 2-3 times in a row were gone. But his dick didn't want to leave her in any way, so there was enough blood in it to stay in her. He was careful not to slip out. No. If he could, he'd stay in her forever. She was crying silently, head buried in his shoulder, trying to stifle her sobs, but failing. It broke his heart. He held her close for long minutes, knowing it would be best for her to get it out of her system. When she calmed, he eased away so he could look at her. She turned her head away, and he gently tilted her face back to his. Even after crying, she was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. How could that be? She'd been rescued at the last minute, been hooded and taken to a place she'd never seen before. She'd had the shock of seeing him after 10 years. He'd fucked her near to death. She'd had a storm of tears. And still she looked beautiful. Her eyes didn't swell. Her nose didn't turn red. The tears simply dried on that pale ivory skin like shards of crystal, and it almost hurt to look at her. He was lying with his entire weight on her, cock still in her. What he had to say required saying not only with words, but with body. He knew that at some primal level, she would hear and feel the truth. I never left you. She was watching him carefully. Out of those pale blue eyes, listening to him, feeling him. A big lie is told with words, but told with the body too. Tiny signals of falsehood, many imperceptible. But they were touching each other all over. He was inside her. His body had the stillness of truth. Her eyes searched his. I thought you'd left me again. Nick closed his eyes in pain. I know, honey. I realized that. There was nothing I could do. I made it up to Lawrence the instant I got back, but you'd left. That night, she whispered. I left that night. I felt like I'd die if I stayed one more minute. His heart clenched as he thought of her. Poor and abandoned, striking out on her own. Because it was the second time you'd left me. There they were, the words he'd been dreading. Because there was no way he could tell her the truth, that the judge had sent him away. Nick knew the judge had been absolutely right to do what he did, but Elle wouldn't see it that way. She'd watched her father decline badly, and he didn't want to add anger to her memories of her father. The judge had been a good and noble man who had had to bear a lot at the end of his life. Wherever the judge was, his daughter wasn't going to resent him because he'd sent Nick away. Nick lifted himself up on his forearms and looked down at her, at this woman he loved with all his heart. He loved her these past 10 years, and he'd love her until the day he died, which might be tomorrow. He cupped her head in his hands and opened himself. He was good at lying, good undercover agent. He never saw a need to tell anyone what was going on inside himself. That stopped right now, because Elle had a right to see inside him, because she was inside him. He looked her in the eyes and opened his soul. I can't tell you why I went away that first time. I could lie to you and you'd believe me. I'm really good at lying, an ace at it, in fact. But I won't lie to you. I'll never lie to you for the rest of our lives. But this one thing, I can't tell you, and you will have to accept that. She thought about it long and hard. She didn't even pretend that she wasn't. He watched her work her way through it, knowing what he was asking her. You won't lie to me? Nick dipped his head, kissed her shoulder, lifted his head again. No, not ever. You'll tell me what's going on here, in this place. For the first time since he'd found her, he felt like smiling. Oh, yeah, because this is your new home. You're going to live here with me and the others for the rest of your life. She sighed, and he could feel her acceptance in her voice, in her skin, in her heart. Tell me, she said, what's going on here? Nick rolled them to their sides because it was going to be a long story, and he didn't want to separate his body from hers. He wanted to stay with her, in her, as long as he could. And he told her everything.